final ghost story for the evening, Miss Marie Wallace.
The vampire was real. Chris knew it the second he threw open the lid of the coffin. Before the creature opened its eyes, Chris knew that it was real. No regular corpse could have looked so very alive. Well, rather dead too, of course, but alive as well. The eyes suddenly flew open. They were black eyes, obsidian black as the night beyond them. They were spectacular eyes, large, hypnotic, fine eyes, filled with red, rimmed with red, as if rimmed with blood. And then it began to smile and stare at Chris's throat. Blood was racing through his system. For a hungry vampire, that pounding of his pulse must have been quite a sight. Then, the creature began to speak. Hello. Chris expected a hoarse rasp, or perhaps an accent, something Romanian, exotic. This vampire had a southern accent. Chris waited for the creature to say something like, I want to drink your blood. But he did not do so. It stared at Chris. Then he rose to a sitting position, very slowly within the boundaries of the coffin. Well, sir, you have awakened me. You must know that I am a vampire, and a very thirsty vampire. Chris found himself staring at the vampire, enwrapped, and very nearly losing hold of the cross that he held within his hand. He fumbled, and then he pushed forth the cross of Damocles. By Satan himself, you carried that talisman? Well, Chris stared at the cross with the same amazement with which he had first stared at the vampire. Oh yes, he had believed. For as long as he remembered, he had believed. Vampires were real. Vampires did exist. Oh, and he loved the stories, so much so that he learned to write them himself. And he had done quite well with it. He started with The Vampire That Ate New York. Yes, oh yes. And then he'd gone through most of America's major cities. But his success had made him restless. He wanted something more. He needed something real. Well, one night in a Houston bar, he heard about this house that was right by the Garden District in New Orleans. It was called the Castle. Now, it was going amazingly cheaply because it had a history of the macabre, suicides within the walls, and disappearances on dark and dreary nights and the like. If there was such a thing as a living or non-living vampire, then Chris was certain that he had found where that vampire should exist. And so he had determined that he would buy the house. And once inside the house, well, Chris knew exactly where to look right from the beginning. There was a cellar, and it was perfect. It was dank and dreary, and there were spider webs galore. Chris loved it. Why, the very first night, he found the Van Helsing papers. Now, the papers revealed that the creature, had been the one to have the castle built. The creature must now be contained, and the cross of Damocles could contain the creature. Anyone holding the cross had power over the creature and could actually bind the creature to his will. But the creature too had powers. The only real way to be safe was to keep the creature locked in a sepulcher with a cross in the brick. For the vampire, awakened, might make demands, and for his life, the man to awaken the beast might well have to meet these demands. There was something else in the papers, too. It all hinged on the number 3. If the vampire 3 times betrayed the mortal who had awakened him, then the vampire would have to give 3 promises to the mortal. Promises that could not be broken. Then Chris found the cross of Damocles, laid over a wall of brick, and he had torn down the brick, and he found himself in a large closet with the smell of dust and mold, and a coffin dead center in the small space. And now, the vampire. You're real! Well, yes, indeed, I'm real. Thirsty, aggravated, no, truly annoyed. Now, what is the meaning of this interruption, really? Well, the vampire was deeply distressed. He slammed down the lid of his coffin, and he hiked himself on top of it. You seem to have no intention of letting me take one good bite out of your neck for a long drink, so why disturb me? I don't want to become a vampire, but I've given some consideration to your needs. I've managed to buy some blood. Human, I hope. Oh, yes, human. Well, Chris strode out of the closet, careful to keep a tight hand on the cross. He found a sanitary plastic container of bright red blood. The vampire was right behind him. In seconds, he had taken the bag from Chris and swallowed down the container to the last drop. Oh, that was good. Well, not as good as taking it fresh from the neck, but delicious after all these years nonetheless. Thank you. Now, just what can I do for you? Well, I'm a writer. Oh, like that Bram Stoker fella. You knew him? Chris excitedly leaned against the table, but crossing his hand, it nearly fell. Oh, you must be careful, Mr. Lambden. Chris Lambden. And you? What's your name? What should I call you? Well, call me Count, of course. Oh, then you are him. You're the original. No. Now look, you were considerate of me. I'll give you something of the story. Now, Bram based his story on Vlad Dracul, the Impaler. He was the killer who killed so many of his people. Well, a gypsy witch whose only son was caught on Vlad's skewers cast a spell upon him, and he became the first of a long line of vampires. Does Vlad the Impaler still live? Well, I mean, exist? Oh, no, I'm afraid not. Alas, I never knew him myself. Well, then how did I become a vampire? Well, now let me see. It was early in the 1800s. I'd come here to New Orleans to make my fortune. But then one night, I was down the bayou with the love of my life when suddenly, swoop, out of the trees they came. Well, I want to tell you, they made a party of it. Dracula pounced down upon my dear Deanna, and when I hastened to her rescue, why, he just set upon me instead. And you died and became a vampire. Oh, no, not directly. Now, whatever in the world have you been reading, and how dare you write about us when you seem to know so very little? Oh, I'm sorry. Now, pay attention. To create a vampire is an art. Blood must be taken 3 times, and it must be taken from the same spot. Then a new creature will be born. Now be serious, Mr. Lambden. The world would have run amok with vampires long ago if it was so very easy to become one. Then, just as Chris was about to ask him another question, a loud voice called his name. It was melodic. It was feminine. Christopher, do you know what time it is? The people from the magazine will be here first thing in the morning, and we're to be on the cover. Chris leapt to his feet. Come on, quick, back into the coffin. How rude. Come on, please, quickly. Right. The creature had just disappeared behind the bricks when Magda appeared at the top of the stairs that led down to the cellar. Chris? Yeah, all right, I'm coming, Magda. Don't worry, I'm not going to ruin your interview. She started to speak again, and then she suddenly spun around and disappeared. She is charming, she's elegant, she is fire. Chris jumped a mile. The vampire was right behind him. The vampire said, oh, she is stunning. And he said, well, she's my wife. And Jesus shrewdly added to himself, oh, well, it didn't matter. Not tonight. Tonight, he had found his creature. Come on, go back to your coffin. I've got to go up to bed. Oh, with that image of grace and beauty so seductive. Come on now, please. Come on, get back. I don't want to have to touch you with my cross of Damocles. Oh! The vampire gasped, and then he headed back for the closet. He started to crawl in when Chris noticed that he had not been lying alone. A woman lay on the far side of the coffin. Ivory skin glowed softly by the jet black beauty of her hair. My Diana. Wow! 2 vampires. How come she didn't awaken? She is not a vampire. She hovers between the land of the living and the dead. You see, Dracula first took her blood, then I did. But then I did not drink her blood a 3rd time. I should either make her my consort at last or choose another. Now the vampire had tired of this conversation. He crawled into his coffin, closed his eyes, and then opened them again. Ah, it does feel good to rest on a full stomach again. Chris closed the lid of the coffin, replaced the bricks, and he set the cross within them, and he hurried up the stairs. On his way up, he started to think about himself and Magda. What had gone wrong with them? What had he done wrong? Then he began to wonder what his life would be like if only he'd married a brunette, like the one lying in the coffin. In her death-like sleep, she appeared so soft and sweet and gentle. Well, he wasn't going to think about it now, not when his life had taken this marvelous turn. There was a vampire in his closet. The next morning, the reporters came. They stayed most of the day, and he and Magda gave them a wonderful interview. Just about at dusk, the reporters left. So did Magda. There was a cocktail party at the Travantes, and she was going to go, even though Chris was determined to refuse. Chris watched her leave, and then he hurried back down to the cellar. The vampire, or Count, as he preferred to be called, he was quite a regular fellow. That night, the vampire talked about his endless trips to Europe. Then he commanded of Chris, "Tell me about your shirt." Chris was wearing a Saints t-shirt. Well, he did his best to describe a rousing game of football. "Oh, I would dearly love to see a game. Won't you take me to one?" "Oh, no. I couldn't let a vampire loose on the streets of New Orleans." "Oh, but I wouldn't be loose. You'd still have your cross." No. Chris shook his head, and he decided it was time to return the vampire to his closet when they were both startled by an intrusion. "Christopher Lambton, I swear I'll have you institutionalized if you don't..." "Oh." Magda hadn't expected company, but she recovered quickly. She offered the vampire one of her most engaging smiles. "Hello." "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know Chris had company. We haven't met. I'm Magda." Oh, she was an atrocious flirt. Well, Chris introduced them. "Oh, yes, Magda. This is Dre," offered the vampire, elegantly kissing Magda's fingers. Chris made an instant decision. "Magda, I've invited him to a Saints game. I'd love you to come too, but I know how you feel about games." "Oh, I'd love to come." "Fine. Well, it was a wonderful game. The home team won and the crowds were going wild. Well, Chris had some difficulty convincing Drake that he couldn't take just one little bite out of one little cheerleader's neck. But really, all in all, Drake was very well behaved. Coming home was a little more difficult. Chris had to convince Magda that Drake would be perfectly happy sleeping in the cellar. Magda was at last convinced, and then she went upstairs. Chris wedged the cross of Damocles into a little niche in the door to the cellar. He kept a sharp eye on Magda that night. When she managed to wander down to the kitchen, he managed to be there, and just as she was about to open the door to the cellar, he said, "What were you doing?" "Oh, I was, just checking on our guest." "Uh-huh. Well, you mustn't go in there." "Why, Christopher?" "Look, do you love me, Magda?" "Well, of course I do, Christopher. What a silly thing to say. Now, why would I stay with such a strange bookworm if I didn't? I could be off seeing the world, Chris, having a life like that of your friend, dancing in Paris, going to bullfights in Madrid. Magda, you must stay out of the closet at night." "Well, of course, darling, if that's what you want." And she turned, all innocence, and started back for the stairs. Chris followed her. He tried very hard to stay awake that night. He awoke with the first pale streaks of dawn. He stretched his hand out on the bed. It was empty. "Magda?" He heard the shower running. He leaned back, breathing in with relief. That night, Magda was in a wonderful mood. She insisted that they show their visit in the Beau Carré, or the French Quarter. They went out. They watched jazz bands, and Drake stared with absolute fascination at all these strip joints. One buxom beauty, obviously just off work, passed their way. "Oh, just a sip, just one little sip from one of those ladies of the night." No, I've got a pint for you at home." Now, when they came home, Magda herself pulled out the sleeper in the cellar. Then she went upstairs. Chris wedged the cross into the door and went on up to bed. Magda wore a nightgown with a lace edge around her throat. There was a band-aid on her neck. "Magda, you must stay away from Drake." "And you mustn't be so jealous. He's your friend. You brought him into the house, remember?" "Uh-huh. And what'd you do to your neck?" "Huh? Oh, huh? Oh. Just a bug bite." Okay. Then Chris kissed her goodnight and held her as he drifted off to sleep. Morning came. She was gone. But once again, he heard the spray of the shower. She was becoming an early riser. Drake was up and ready when Chris came down the stairs that night. "I'm ready. What will it be tonight? A game, some music, a stroll?" "Well, you said you wanted to see Bourbon Street. Let's go see Bourbon Street." They walked through the Beau Carré once again. Magda was busy talking away. The vampire knew Paris like the back of his hand. He could rattle away in French. He even kissed Magda's finger right in the middle of their meal at Kay Paul's. But he was getting sloppy. Because during that kiss, Chris could see the glittering tip of the fangs. He came so close to an honest-to-God bite right there in the restaurant. But anyway, soon they were home again, and they bade the vampire goodnight, and upstairs Chris bade his wife goodnight. She fell asleep so very quickly. There was a much larger band-aid on her neck now. Chris roused himself. He silently descended and opened the cellar door, slipping the cross of Damocles into the pocket of his robe. The vampire, seated beside the television set, didn't notice him. So Chris crept around in back of him, and he sank into the swivel chair behind his desk. And he waited. At exactly 2 a.m., the cellar door opened. Magda, a vision of innocence and purity, appeared at the top of the stairs. Drake, my darling. Oh, Drake, we've got to stop meeting like this. Christopher suspects. Oh, my darling Magda, after tonight it will not matter anymore. Oh, Drake, after tonight it'll matter more than ever. Oh, Drake, I want to do all the things that you do, all the things that you talk about all the time. I want to travel, to roam the continents. Paris in April, London's shopping spree, all the exotic places you come from. Oh, hell, he comes from New Orleans. Chris jumped in. He was so angry that he could no longer take it. The vampire smiled, holding Magda close against himself. It's too late, Chris. You thought yourself so clever. Well, I've had her twice, and now she is mine. Oh, Christopher, I'm sorry, but I am his. She didn't seem to quite understand how she was his. Dear Christopher, I do love you, but I want to be with him. I want to fly. Magda, he's a vampire. Oh, Christopher. Oh, listen to your crazy, crazy things, your strange fantasies. Can't you just accept it? Someone else came along, someone fascinating, someone intriguing. Mm-hmm. So you'd really rather be with him, huh? Even though he's a vampire. Oh, if he was Satan himself. Mm-hmm. Okay, hey, who am I to stand in your way? Okay, go ahead, go right ahead. Magda cringed when the vampire flatly showed his fangs with no finesse or pretense whatsoever. Chris, my God, he is a vampire. Better than Satan himself, I guess. The fangs were at her throat. Magda fell to her feet like a rag doll. She'll come too soon, a vampire. So sorry, old boy, but you must have been asleep at the helm, as they say. Oh, no, sorry, old boy, but you must have been asleep at the helm. Pardon? Well, I awakened you, and you betrayed me 3 times. The 3 times it took to make Magda into a vampire. She was my wife, remember? You must now obey my 3 commands. The vampire scowled, starting for him. Chris put out the cross, and the creature stood back. All right, what do you want? Well, I want you to leave here tonight. And of course you'll take Magda. And since I don't want any trouble with the police, you'll make a show of going. And where am I going? Well, Europe, of course. I'll see that your coffin is sent on ahead. Now that's 1. And 2, no more people. I'll keep you well supplied with blood from the blood bank. Oh, just a little sip of blood, a fresh one now and then. No, never. Now, there's 1 more command. Awaken Deanna. You can leave her with me. You and Magda are going to need all the room you can get in that tiny little coffin. Trust me, she kicks. The vampire muttered something and then directed his forefinger toward the closet and the coffin. Deanna will be up and about in just a few minutes. Magda was starting to come through, to come round. She still seemed disoriented. It didn't matter. The vampire dragged her up beside him and said, "We're leaving." Chris followed them up the stairs. As the vampire had been commanded, he made a show of leaving. But once he and Magda were down the street, he swept up his arms dramatically, just like Lugosi had done in the movies, and he became a bat. Magda let out a little cry, but in seconds, she too became a second black creature of the night. Beside him, she screamed, "Oh no, what did you do to me?" "Well, Paris, you wanted to go to Paris." "Yes, but I wanted to fly first class on an airplane with champagne." Chris started to laugh. The vampire certainly had his hands full. There was a soft noise behind Chris. at the doorway to the castle. Diana. Chills swept along his spine. What had the vampire left him? Would he turn to find a withered crone? A skeleton frame with cloth that decayed, quickly becoming ashes in the wind? He turned. His chills dissipated. It was indeed Diana. She offered him a breathtaking, tremulous smile. I'm human. Oh, and you must be my hero. Oh, a hero I could learn to love for eternity. No, not eternity, just a normal lifetime. Oh, yes, a normal lifetime. Oh, God, it's been such a long, long time since I've been asleep. What year is it? Oh, it's 1992. Oh, I'm afraid I have so much to learn. Will you tell me about it? Come on, let me take you into the house. Oh, the house looks so familiar. Well, it should be familiar. Of course it has changed over the years. Come on, let me show you. My name is Christopher Lambden, and I write books about Yes? You write books about what? Cowboys. From now on, I write books about cowboys. That was A Vampire in His Closet by Heather Graham.